I'm Jace, and I'm a sex addict. This is Sex Life, where we talk about sex and we talk about life. The two are so intimately connected, I don't know how we do one without the other. This week is a follow-up to last week's video. If you answered yes to any of that criteria that we mentioned last week around whether or not you're a sex addict, then the following question becomes, okay, yes, I think I'm a sex addict. What do I do now? In this video, I'm going to share the top 3 things that I recommend doing right at the beginning if you do believe that you are a sex addict. Number 1, find a community that you can be completely honest with and that is going to support you in your recovery. So many of us believe that this is something that we can handle on our own. A lot of us feel we don't want to tell anyone or even maybe admit out loud that we are a sex addict and that we're going to deal with it in private. You can't. And not like you can't. No one can. You know, they talk about addiction really thriving in isolation, and there's a lot of new studies that are looking at the connection between isolation and addiction, and they're finding that it's a really huge component for active addiction, as well as other issues that follow that as well. So I'm not trying to be harsh or insulting, but you cannot handle this on your own. None of us can. We absolutely need a community. As humans, we are designed to be in community and to receive help and support from a community. So find a community that you can be open with, even if it's not right away, but you feel comfortable and you trust that you can get support around sex addiction specifically. There are 12-step programs around sex addiction. There are church programs around it. There are other programs that just deal with addiction in general and are open to everyone. There are support groups around this stuff. There is a lot of help, and it's growing around sex addiction. So those can be found in a lot of cities. A surprising amount of cities are getting more and more resources for sex addiction. And so you can check in your area and look for sex addiction help that way. Or there are communities online as well, quite a few of them. If you don't have somewhere you can go in person in your community, you can find that online. And there are also telephone communities as well. I recommend going in person if you can. There's a lot of shame that's reduced when you're able to show up in a group of people and say, you know, here's what I'm struggling with, and receive acceptance and love and support from those people that really know you and really know what you're going through. So find a community that you can trust, that you feel you're able to be entirely honest with. That will make or break your recovery. And we're not just talking about recovery from sex addiction. We are talking about that extraordinary life that we're all capable of, right? But we can't do that if we're in hiding and we're not being honest and we don't feel we can trust people. So find whatever community works for you. Number 2 is education. If you've just realized, like, oh my gosh, I think I am a sex addict, what does that mean? There's tons of books and websites and videos and centers and all sorts of resources around education on what sex addiction is, what it is not, and what to do about it as well. So you can, even just doing a quick Google search, you will come up with a lot of stuff. And there are people in the academic world who specialize in this who have written books. Patrick Carnes is a huge name in the sex addiction world, and he's kind of the grandfather of recovery for sex addiction. He has tons of books and resources. Rob Weiss is a really great sex addiction therapist, and he's an author as well. He has a really simple little book out called Sex Addiction 101 that is really good for sex addicts and their loved ones as well. Alexandra Katehakis is a great author in this area. Charlotte Castle has a really, really, really good book called Women, Sex, and Addiction. That one is phenomenal. Stacy Sprout is an author who wrote about her own experience around sex addiction in her book, Naked in Public, that came out a few years ago. That's a really good one. And there are tons of other ones that are around this area. So grab a book. You can get them at the library. You can get them at the bookstore. You can get them online, of course. You can even get them in secondhand stores. More and more you're seeing in bookstores, there's like a whole section on addiction. And then there's even in some bookstores a whole section on intimacy disorders. So you can look there and find these books. And of course, there's stuff on YouTube. There's stuff on people's websites. There's blogs, there's tons of information, but you have to get informed. There are people that I've known in recovery for years who don't even realize that addiction is a brain disease, or that it ties to, maybe childhood trauma or things that went on in early life. They have no idea of any of that, which really limits their recovery and their ability to have that extraordinary life. So find your community that you can trust that's going to support you. Get educated around sex addiction. And number 3, we just touched on that addiction is more and more in the scientific community being tied to early childhood incidents, usually trauma in the form of neglect or abuse of many different forms. I have not met an addict yet who has not undergone some kind of abuse in early childhood. Knowing that, it's key to have an expert, a professional who can help you deal with the trauma and the things that have come up. And if you're like me, I had trauma happen to me when I was a child, and then I re-traumatized myself sexually for the years to come through sex addiction. I did horrible things to myself. I let horrible things happen to me. I did horrible things to other people. I mean, it's just like a tornado of trauma in this body. And so having someone who has the tools, the expertise, and the background that can help you through that is going to make or break your recovery. A lot of people don't think that they can afford therapy. And I can tell you, I have been in therapy when I have had no income. There are organizations that will help people get counseling for little to no money. Of course, there are therapists that if you have the money, you can go to specific centers or rehab clinics or see really specialized people in this area. And then there's everything in between. And so start checking out some people. It's new. A lot of people with their company benefits through their employers, they have mental health benefits as well. And so seeing a therapist might just cost the same as it would to go to your regular physician. So check that out if you have an employer. Of course, they never report on what you are looking for help from. So find therapy, ideally someone who deals with sex addiction specifically. At the very least, someone who deals with just general addiction and has an understanding of addiction. And most importantly, someone who specializes in trauma. You might not know that there's any trauma in your past. You might not even think there's any trauma in your past. But there's not just healthy people who, have too much sex and then become sex addicts. That's the idea, right? And I get that question. How much sex do I have to have before I become a sex addict? That's not how addiction works. So there really is a tie to what happened in our early life to what we go on to experience as we get older. So find that community that you trust that is going to support you. Educate yourself with resources on what sex addiction is and what to do about it. And find a therapist that you trust and that you enjoy. Well, maybe you don't enjoy it, but you trust them. And start yourself in some kind of counseling. Some people do that through their church. Some people do that through specialized programs for sex addiction. Whatever it is, find what works for you and have that already set up as you go into this journey into healing from sex addiction. Just dealing with the behavior itself is like treating the symptoms of a chronic illness. As soon as you stop treating those symptoms, everything's going to come right back up. So when we deal with the actual problem, which comes into the trauma and the genetics of addiction, then we're really going in and cutting out the illness instead of just treating those symptoms. And that way, we don't have to be treating each single symptom for the rest of our lives, which is what happens when we're just treating the behavior. So we got to get in there, get into the root of the problem and start dealing with it there, and the symptoms will take care of themselves. So if you had a wound, you would likely not deal with that in a dark closet with like rusty, blunt instruments, right? You would go into an operating room with a professional surgeon in a sterile environment and have a professional take care of it. Same exact thing that we're dealing with addiction and trauma. You want a professional to be helping you through that. So those are the top and first 3 things I recommend doing if you do indeed believe you are a sex addict. They will make all the difference in what your life can look like this moment moving forward. Thank you so much for sending that question in. If you have a question or a comment, you can send that through my website, jacedowney.com. You'll find a link for that below. Please subscribe to these videos so you never miss an episode. And I'll catch y'all next time. Stay curious.